Hello, and welcome to Black Marriage Therapy, BMT for short. Here we become students of marriage in order to create healthy, long lasting relationships. I'm your host, Kristen Smith, and in today's episode, we discuss understanding your personal values and how it affects your marriage. Specifically, in this episode, we will discuss understanding what values are, what goes wrong when we don't understand our values, and how it affects our marriage, how to understand our own personal values, and also respect and acceptance when it comes to our spouses. If you have been enjoying the content, please follow us on Instagram at Black Marriage Therapy, rate us on your podcast platform, and share your favorite episode with a friend. We also have a unique opportunity for you to support this podcast monthly. All you have to do is go to our show notes and click the link to support this podcast. For as little as 99 cents per month, you can partner with us to continue to provide you with high quality content. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. I'm so excited to be discussing this topic with you. I feel like in the recent episodes, we have been kind of going back down to our like foundational basics when it comes to marriage principles and skills and things like that. And I think it's a good thing because I don't think we spent enough time on this podcast doing that. So recently, if you don't know, we did a episode on emotional intelligence and understanding your emotions and how that affects your relationship. Recently, Junior spoke specifically to the men about emotional wellness and anger with a friend to the podcast, and he shared such a wealth of information. So I hope that you guys will check it out. And today we're talking about values. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but and when I was doing premarital counseling, this is not something that really came up. And I feel like this should be introduced in every premarital counseling course. We have to have a basic understanding of our personal values because that is going to affect what we believe in and ultimately affect how we behave in our relationship. And sometimes we're having arguments in our relationship. It's like, oh, it's about the trash and it's about the car and it's about this, and of course those things matter, but sometimes when you look beneath those things, the argument that you're really having is, well, I value this and you value this. And because we disagree, then we're having friction. So it's important that we understand values. And this is what we're talking about today. So, first things first, let's talk about what values are. I like this definition. It says that values are deeply held principles or standards that guide behavior and decision making. They represent what is most important to a person or society, such as honesty, kindness, freedom, or success. A good example of this is valuing honesty might lead someone to always tell the truth, even when it's difficult. Valuing family might lead someone to prioritize spending time with loved ones. So I think that's a really easy way to understand values. So I'll give you one for myself. And I end up taking a value assessment, which was very helpful to me. And I'm going to share it with as a link in the show notes so you can take it too. But one thing that came up and is actually pretty recent in my life is achievement. This has been coming up a lot in our relationship where Junior is like, oh, you're ambitious, or like, you really want success and all these different things. I've never seen myself as a person who is ambitious or like chasing success or whatever. I do come from a very ambitious family. Like even my grandmother like owned her own store and things like that in Haiti. My father had opened multiple businesses. My brother is a CEO of a nonprofit agency. Like there's my sister owns her own event planning company, like there's entrepreneurship flowed throughout my entire family. I do understand that. And I feel like I have visions and I have goals, but I just never attributed my behaviors or my decision making process, my choices to the fact that I value like achievement and I value like that ambitious nature. So it's funny, Junior is the one who's really brought it up to me. And now I've been like evaluating and thinking about it and journaling and like really looking at my behaviors and like, oh, shoot, I value achievement. And what that allows me to do is say, wait, is this why I'm making that decision? Is this why I hold that belief? Is why I feel like you should do this and do that, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm realizing, oh, that is where everything is stemming from. And now I'm more aware and I can move, through that value. So that's just one example. Okay, so let's move on to the next segment. What goes wrong when you don't understand your values, and how does that affect your relationship? Your values are really the core of who you are. And as we mentioned in the definition, it drives your beliefs. It drives what you believe to be true, and that drives your behavior and your decision making. So if you don't have an understanding of your values and you're just acting on your behaviors, sometimes you're only focused on the behavior. And in marriage, sometimes we're having argument or conflict over a certain behavior, over a certain decision, a habit that somebody has over and over again, when we need to be having conversation about what that person values, because it brings a level of understanding into the relationship and allows us to have more deep, richer conversations and problem solve a little bit better. So, one way to show how, not knowing your values can go wrong is inconsistent or incongruent behavior. So, for example, you may be saying one thing, but your behavior is showing another thing. Your behavior is, I would say, almost always going to show what you value. And I know that sounds hard to understand because it's just like, we really think that it be willpower, or we really think what we say is true. But like, if you pay attention to a person, their behaviors, their habits, their decisions are really going to show you what they value ultimately. So, so when you have a conflict in the thing that you're saying versus the thing you're doing, then that may be a ding, ding, ding for you to say, okay, wait, what is my behavior showing that I value? So for example, if you're saying, "Oh, I'm a family man, I'm here for my wife, I'm here for my kids," right? But every chance you get, you're working. Every moment that you get, like if that means, like you got to leave dinner early or come home late or, go out the house early or on a weekend, you're like, "Yo, I'm there." So, although you're saying one thing, your behavior is showing that you value, work and you value that thing. And here's the thing, I'm not trying to say that your values are right or wrong. Like, that's not what I'm saying here. But you have to be really honest and understand your values on a really deep level so that you can work with them, because, some people, there's a school of thought that believes your value can change, your core beliefs, your core value system can change. Some people feel like they're stagnant. And then some people believe it's a mix of both, depending on life and circumstances. Some people's values do shift a little bit. But for the most part, our values are pretty consistent and may have the and may change. So it's not to shame you or to say like, hey, your values are wrong if you value work and providing and things like that. But let's be honest with it, right? There's a lot of conflict and confusion and inconsistency if you're saying one thing and doing another. So another example of how not knowing your values goes wrong is you don't understand boundaries or you have inconsistent boundaries. Because if you don't know what's important to you, how do you know how to protect it? If you don't know what's important to you, how do you know how to protect it? And that essentially is what a boundary is. I'll give you an example. I value autonomy. I value freedom, right? So I need to put boundaries in place with my husband and with my children to let them know I need space. I need to be able to make decisions on my own. I need time to like process and think things through. I need time to have like self-care time. Like this is super, super important to me. How can I set boundaries if I don't know what's important to me? So that's another example of how not knowing your values can go wrong. The last way not knowing your values can have things go left is resentment or blaming others. When you don't have a good sense of your value system, like that core fundamental, thing that roots you, then you may make other people the problem for why things aren't going right. So, for example, let's say you value communication, right? You're just a communicative type of person but you don't have that understanding. You don't really understand that. So when someone is, giving you the cold shoulder or not communicative or things like that, you're blaming them like, oh, well, you're not talking or you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And really and truly, you don't have an understanding. You're resenting them or you're blaming them for something, but you don't really have a full understanding of the reason why this is so important to you. and you can't take full ownership of it because you don't understand it. So these three examples is just a way to show you that this is why boundaries are so important, and even more so why it's so important to your marriage. Now, all those things that I talk about, right? We talked about boundaries, we talked about inconsistent action, we talked about resentment or blaming, all these different things. And we didn't even talk about the most obvious thing, right? Conflict and miscommunication and things like that. All those things, think about you how that shows up in a relationship, in a marriage with another person. And again, this is why it's so important for you to have even a foundational understanding of your values. Because when you have an understanding of your values, you can communicate better, you can express yourself better. You can explain and understand why you have these type of habits or why you make these certain decisions or why you behave this way, right? And you're able to communicate better. You're able to compromise better. You're able to more resilient, right? So for example, let's say you value fairness. This is a great one in the household. You value fairness. If your spouse is deferring to you to do most of the housework, you may begin peeved. You're pissed off all the time, right? And it may be something simple like, oh, they're just not taking the trash out. They're not really holding their weight as much. But if you understand, I value fairness, imagine how much better that conversation can go where you can say, listen, I really, really believe and I really want our duties to be fair in the household. And that's important to me. Are you going to get everything you want? Probably not, but we're gonna talk more about that. But it's a place to start getting creative, to start negotiating, to start having some type of acceptance, to be able to respect one another and understand us as two individual beings coming in with very different value sets and figuring out how do we make this work? How can we get creative about this? It's just a place to start. Okay, so how do we actually start to understand our values? There's a lot of different ways. I think that because we live in 2024, you can just like go online and look up a values assessment. I actually found one that I thought was pretty good and it was free. Girl, don't pay no money to do this values assessment, please. Okay. There are free ones online that I'll have linked below. And that kind of helps you and it gives you like really good in depth understanding and information. Now, you are going to have to give up that email. You know that thing. That email is a price to pay. You don't have to give up that email to get like the full report and stuff like that, but that's one way to do it. But there are some other ways that doesn't require an assessment. You really have to like explore yourselves. You have to be willing to like ask yourself some hard questions and look at the behaviors, the patterns of your behavior and your decision making and really ask yourself, well, what are my decisions really saying? What is my behavior really showing? So for example, we've had this conversation before, but we recently found out that Junior really values action. And my husband and I used to get in arguments for it all the time because I'm like, why can't you just be patient? Why do you have to go so fast? Why do you have to like go from thought to action in like 2.5 seconds? And all his decision making, all his behaviors, which was hella annoying to me, was pointing to this thing. I thought he was just being rigid. I thought he was being annoying. I thought he was doing this and this and this. And I'm realizing this guy really values action. And that was a different conversation that we end up having. Now we understood, oh, I get it. I get it. Now we're like, how do we work this out? So paying attention to your patterns and your decision making is one way. Definitely reflecting on your past experiences and seeing like, wait, what was I taught in my home? Like what was really important in my home? My husband and I both come from Caribbean background. Family is like the most important thing in most Caribbean families. I'm Haitian, he's Jamaican. So we both came in valuing family. We knew for certain we were going to spend the money to go visit grandpa and nana and we were going to like have Thanksgiving gatherings and we were going to make ourselves available to our family because we knew it was very, very important. Also, you can just think about the things that give you life, that make you feel alive and bring you joy or make you feel whole. That's one way to do it. And also, this is a good one. Look at what you admire in other people. right? So let's say you have a favorite author, a favorite celebrity, or a favorite pastor, whatever that thing is. And what is that thing that you admire about that person? That may help you to gain insight into like, hmm, maybe that is something that I value. Of course, you can ask other people. You can ask your mom or your dad, get some feedback from your family because they may be able to see something that you don't. I mentioned earlier that I'm realizing that I value achievement and like being ambitious. And the first time I really thought about this was for my 30th birthday. My husband, he got all my family and friends to write like beautiful notes and messages, and he put it together in this book, and it's so beautiful. But the amount of times that I saw people write, like, oh, you just go for your dreams, and you're like, you're a go getter, and you just, you go after the things that you want. And I'm like, in my mind's eye, that's not how I see myself. I really don't. But guess what? Other people see that. And I really had to look at it. I was like, shoot, let me think about my decisions. Let me think about my behaviors. Let me think about where I'm trying to go in life. And I'm realizing, oh, shoot, that is absolutely right. This definitely is a value for me. And that's something that is helping me to like navigate my future. Like, oh, wait, okay, how do I want to make decisions, from here on out? And then a simple one, and that's this one I found online, but it's simple. You can just do it in your journal. You can take some time to write down your beliefs. Your beliefs are the things that you think are like you hold true to yourself. Like these are the things. Write a list of things that you think are right and wrong, what is important in life, and what you aspire to be. Like, don't censor yourself. Write it all out. Let your thoughts flow freely. And then after you write it, you're going to review what you've written and identify common themes, and those themes often point to your core values. All right. So we have gone over what values are very quickly. We have also talked about what goes wrong when you don't know your values and how that affects your marriage. We now have a basic understanding of how we can ourselves begin to learn our values. But the last thing I want to talk about is how do we apply this to our marriage? Once you have this basic understanding of your values, how do you apply this to your marriage? This is very important because a lot of the conflicts and arguments that we're having about our certain behaviors and decision making is a conversation about our values. And we may be stressed and, going back and forth and, having issues with boundaries, as I mentioned, but we're not having deeper conversations about our values. And I think that this is the part where respect and acceptance come in when it comes to your values. As I mentioned before, your values aren't right or wrong, right? They are what's important to you. Your spouse also has values that's important to them, and they're not right or wrong. So when we have a difference of values, we have to understand those values, but then not impose how we want to go about those values onto our spouse. So, for example, if I value achievement and I'm an ambitious person, imagine if I'm like upset or resentful towards my husband for not being ambitious or not like wanting to, you know, win every goal. Like everything's about winning, everything's about achieving, like if he's not like that, or if he doesn't value that and I'm imposing that value onto him, a lot of conflict can come up, right? So there has to be a level of respect for your own values, of course, but then for your spouse's own values. And you have to understand that how these things play out in marriage, you can get creative about. It doesn't have to be your way or the highway. Just because you value it doesn't mean you're right. And I think that is very important to understand, right? If you're building a house and somebody wants to build it with wood and somebody wants to build it with cement blocks, you can't decide like, oh well, it's right to build it with wood or is it right to build it with cement blocks or whatever. Like that is what's important to them. That's what they're choosing. So there's definitely a level of respect that has to come, but then there's also a level of acceptance. Now this may be the hard part because when you go through this and you go through the values assessment, you may find that between you and your spouse, there may be some fundamental differences. And that may be challenging for you because you really have to think for yourself. And this is why I feel like it's important to do this in premarital before you walk down the aisle. But you may have to have some conversations with yourself and your spouse and think like, wait a second, this person values this and I value this. this is constantly going to clash. And when that happens, you can either make a decision to come up with a creative solution or mm, people part their ways, right? Because they have different values, right? And I'm not saying that you should get divorced or anything, but I'm like, certain things can be such a point of tension and contention that people are like, I can't do this anymore. And it makes sense. A perfect example, I think, is family. Family is a big one. Someone may value traditional family values, right? Like going over to Nana's house and Easter and, like I said, the family reunion, making those trips, having conversations with your family, letting them into your home, letting them come cook and see the baby. That may be one person. Another person, maybe they don't have those strong family ties and they don't have that value system for those traditional family values. Or maybe they come from like an individualistic culture where it's like it's more about you and your life and things like that. So one person is coming from the value of like family, and another person is coming from the value of like autonomy, independent, like outside of family. That may continue to clash. One person may be like, let's just do Christmas by ourselves. And the other person is like, no, we have to go see grandma. We have to, right? So guys are having arguments about Christmas, but it's showing that there is a fundamental difference here. And when you know that, you have to be able to respect one another and also accept that this is a fundamental difference. From there, what I would suggest is to be creative, is to compromise, to be flexible, to negotiate. We have a whole episode on negotiating in marriage and the best way you can try to get a win-win situation. And I know that it's difficult when it comes to like the things that are fundamental to you, but you have to be able to be open and be flexible and have a level of understanding and acceptance for your spouse. So in the case of the family, maybe it's every other Christmas, right? Maybe one Christmas we do it on our own. We have our own pajamas, we have our own traditions. And the other Christmas, we going to mommy and poppy house, right? It's gonna be 25 cousins there. It's gonna be three different type of dinners and all those things. So that is what I would say is the most important thing is when you're understanding these values. Don't be afraid of going through these values assessment and realizing that you guys have some fundamental differences. That's okay. That's why John Gottman talks about the 69% of our problems not being resolved. It's not because those problems can't be solved. It's because they're stemming from our values. They're stemming from the fundamental differences of us as individual people. So it's not a scary thing. It's just that as a couple, we have to learn how to be resilient. We have to learn how to be creative. We have to learn how to negotiate and to compromise. We have to have a level of respect and acceptance in order to navigate these issues. So this is why I say this is like one of those fundamental skills that we have to learn in our marriage. Well, that is all that I have for you guys today. Remember, everything that we talked about is going to be in the show notes, including the values assessment and even more information to help you really make your marriage thrive. We're going to end with a quote, as we always do. Values are like fingerprints. Nobody's are the same, but you leave them all over everything you do. That is by Elvis Presley. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Black Marriage Therapy. If you haven't yet, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Black Marriage Therapy. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you soon.